When King Farouk I of Egypt sailed into exile aboard the royal yacht Mahroussa in July 1952, he left behind more than a throne. Behind the gilded gates of Abdeen Palace remained 3 young daughters, Ferial, Fawzia, and Fadia, and a 6-month-old son who had been proclaimed King Fuad II before he could even walk. The Free Officers' Revolution had swept away a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly a century and a half, scattering the royal family across Europe like seeds on foreign soil. In the decades that followed, these 4 children of the last king would forge lives far removed from the marble halls and ceremonial splendor of their births. Princess Ferial would become a Swiss hotelier's wife, Princess Fawzia, a professional interpreter and pilot, Princess Fadia, an artist and mother in Lausanne. The infant king would grow into a businessman in Geneva, carrying an empty title through a life of careful anonymity. Their stories unfolded quietly across Switzerland's lakes and mountains, through London's rain and Rome's ancient streets, stories of adaptation rather than restoration, of careers rather than crowns, of private triumphs and losses witnessed only by those who had learned to see them not as former royalty, but as fellow exiles finding their way in a world that had moved beyond kings. Today we follow each of them from birth in Egyptian palaces to burial in Cairo's soil, to answer a simple question: whatever happened to Farouk's children? On November 17, 1938, the sound of 21 cannon shots echoed across Alexandria as Egypt celebrated the birth of its first royal princess in over 2 decades. Princess Ferial came into the world at Abdeen Palace, the seaside retreat where the Mediterranean breeze carried the scent of orange blossoms through rooms decorated with Persian carpets and European crystal. She was the first child of King Farouk I and Queen Farida, born into a dynasty that traced its lineage to Muhammad Ali Pasha, the Albanian Ottoman officer who had made himself master of Egypt more than a century before. The early years of Ferial's life unfolded within the protected world of royal ceremony. At Abdeen Palace in Cairo, she was raised by English nannies who taught her proper posture and French tutors who filled her days with literature and arithmetic. The palace corridors, lined with portraits of her ancestors, became her playground, while the formal gardens provided space for afternoon walks under the watchful eyes of her governess. Queen Farida, herself educated in France and fluent in multiple languages, ensured that her eldest daughter received an education befitting a princess who might one day represent Egypt on the world stage. The princess's childhood was marked by the rhythms of court life, state dinners where she might appear briefly to curtsy before foreign dignitaries, religious festivals celebrated with traditional splendor, and summers spent at Abdeen Palace where the royal family could enjoy relative privacy. Photographs from this period show a solemn child with dark eyes and carefully arranged hair, wearing the elaborate dresses considered appropriate for a king's daughter. Yet even in these sheltered years, the currents of political change were stirring beyond the palace walls. Egypt had gained nominal independence from Britain in 1922, but British influence remained strong and a growing nationalist movement questioned both foreign interference and royal privilege. King Farouk, who had inherited the throne as a teenager in 1936, struggled to balance the competing demands of Egyptian patriots, British advisors, and his own desire for genuine sovereignty. By the late 1940s, military defeats in Palestine and economic troubles at home had turned public opinion increasingly against the monarchy. Princess Ferial, now approaching adolescence, could hardly have understood the full implications of the political crisis engulfing her father's reign, but the atmosphere at court had grown tense. Palace routine continued, lessons, ceremonies, family dinners, but underneath lay an awareness that the world her family had known for generations was under threat. The end came suddenly in the summer of 1952. On July 23rd, a group of military officers led by Gamal Abdel Nasser seized control of key installations in Cairo. 3 days later, faced with an ultimatum to abdicate or face the consequences, King Farouk signed away his throne. Princess Ferial, not yet. 14 watched as palace staff packed the family's belongings with hurried efficiency. On July 26, the royal yacht Mahroussa carried the king into exile, while Queen Farida and her daughters prepared to follow by another route. The transition from princess to exile was swift and jarring. Within weeks of her father's abdication, Ferial found herself in Switzerland, a country she had visited only briefly during royal tours, but which would become her home for the rest of her life. The family initially settled in a villa near Lausanne, where the Alps provided a dramatic backdrop utterly unlike the desert landscapes of Egypt. For a girl who had never attended a regular school or mixed freely with children outside the royal household, the adjustment required considerable resilience. Swiss schools operated on principles of discipline and egalitarianism that contrasted sharply with the deference Ferial had known at court. Her classmates were the children of bankers, diplomats, and local merchants, comfortable but not aristocratic, curious about the Egyptian princess in their midst, but not overawed by her former status. Queen Farida, herself adapting to life without royal privilege, insisted that her daughters learn practical skills alongside their academic studies. The princesses took cooking lessons, learned to manage modest budgets, and discovered the particular satisfaction that comes from accomplishing tasks without a retinue of servants. For Ferial, the eldest and most conscious of what they had lost, this period demanded a fundamental re-examination of her identity and expectations. The divorce of her parents in 1948 had already strained family bonds, and life in exile revealed the full extent of their isolation from the world they had known. King Farouk, settled in Rome and Monaco, maintained minimal contact with his daughters. Queen Farida, managing on a much reduced income, focused on providing her children with the education and emotional stability they would need to build independent lives. Ferial proved to be an excellent student, displaying particular aptitude for languages and literature. She became fluent in German and improved her already considerable skills in French and English, talents that would serve her well in later years. More importantly, she developed the quiet dignity and self-reliance that would characterize her adult life. Teachers remembered her as serious and well-mannered, neither trading on her royal background nor apologizing for it. As the 1960s began, Princess Ferial had completed her transformation from protected royal child to young woman capable of navigating the world on her own terms. The process had not been easy. Letters from this period, preserved in family archives, reveal occasional homesickness for Egypt and uncertainty about the future. But the foundation had been laid for a life that, while far removed from the grandeur of her birth, would be marked by personal integrity and quiet achievement. In 1966, at the age of 27, Princess Ferial married Jean-Pierre Perrotin, a Swiss businessman involved in the hospitality industry. The wedding, held in Lausanne, was a modest affair by royal standards, a far cry from the state ceremonies that might have marked such an occasion had the monarchy survived. The guest list included family friends from their Swiss exile years, a few distant relatives, and colleagues from Perrotin's business circle. Queen Farida, now living quietly in Switzerland, attended with her other daughters, presenting a picture of dignified adaptation to reduced circumstances. Jean-Pierre Perrotin, who later adopted the name Samir Sharif, had built a successful career managing hotels in Switzerland's resort regions. He was a practical man who understood the tourism industry and appreciated Princess Ferial's linguistic abilities and natural grace with international guests. The marriage represented, for both parties, a union based on mutual respect and shared values rather than royal alliance or political calculation. The couple settled in a comfortable home near Montreux, where Princess Ferial embraced domestic life with the same thoroughness she had once applied to her studies. She learned to manage household affairs, entertained guests with elegant simplicity, and gradually built a social circle that included both Swiss professionals and members of the international community drawn to the region's schools and cultural attractions. In 1968, Princess Ferial gave birth to her only child, a daughter named Yasmin. Motherhood brought new purpose to her life and represented a continuation of the royal bloodline under vastly different circumstances. Yasmin grew up as a Swiss citizen, attending local schools and speaking German as her first language, though Princess Ferial ensured that she understood her Egyptian heritage and could communicate in Arabic. The early years of marriage and motherhood were marked by relative contentment. Princess Ferial had found a role that suited her temperament, supporting her husband's business endeavors while raising their daughter according to principles that combined Swiss practicality with the dignity she had learned at court. Photographs from this period show a woman who had grown comfortable with her chosen life, elegant but unpretentious. devoted to family while maintaining the poise that marked her royal upbringing. However, the marriage would not endure. By the mid-1970s, differences in temperament and expectations had created strains that proved impossible to resolve. The divorce, finalized in the late 1970s, was conducted with discretion and mutual respect. Princess Ferial retained custody of Yasmin and received a settlement that ensured financial security, though she would never again enjoy the comfortable abundance of her married years. The dissolution of her marriage marked the beginning of Princess Ferial's most private and, in many ways, most admirable period. As a divorced woman in her 40s with a teenage daughter to raise, she faced the challenge of building an independent life while maintaining the standards of conduct she considered essential to her dignity and her daughter's future. Princess Ferial chose to live quietly, avoiding the social prominence that her title might have afforded. She took a modest apartment in Montreux, furnished it with family pieces that had survived the exodus from Egypt, and focused on providing Yasmin with a stable home environment. The princess supported herself through occasional work as a translator and cultural consultant, her linguistic skills and understanding of Middle Eastern customs proving valuable to Swiss businesses with international interests. During these years, Princess Ferial became the unofficial caretaker of her family's emotional well-being. When her sister Fawzia was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1995, Ferial organized care and provided practical support. When Fadia faced health challenges, it was Ferial who coordinated medical appointments and maintained communication with distant relatives. She had become the family's anchor, the one who preserved traditions and ensured that the sisters remained connected to each other and to their Egyptian heritage. The 1990s brought occasional opportunities for Princess Ferial to visit Egypt as restrictions on former royal family members were gradually relaxed. These trips, usually connected to legal matters involving family property or burial arrangements, provided bittersweet reminders of what had been lost and what endured. She found a country transformed by revolution, modernization, and population growth, yet still recognizable in its essential character. Princess Ferial's final years were marked by declining health and increasing reclusion. She had developed cancer, and the treatments available to her proved insufficient to halt the disease's progression. Yet she maintained her dignity to the end, receiving visitors with gracious hospitality and ensuring that family affairs were properly managed for the benefit of future generations. On December 19, 2009, Princess Ferial died peacefully in Montreux at the age of 71. In accordance with her wishes, her body was transported to Egypt for burial in the royal cemetery at the Al-Rifa'i Mosque in Cairo. The ceremony was attended by Egyptian officials and members of the Muhammad Ali dynasty who had gathered from across Europe and the Middle East. Princess Ferial, the firstborn child of the last king, had completed a circle that began in Egyptian palaces and ended in Egyptian soil, her life a bridge between the monarchy that was and the republic that emerged from its ashes. 2 years after Princess Ferial's celebrated arrival, Abdeen Palace witnessed the birth of King Farouk's second daughter on April 7, 1940. Princess Fawzia entered the world during a period of unprecedented global turmoil, as World War II reshaped the map of Europe and North Africa. Yet within the walls of the royal palace, her early years unfolded with the same ceremonial precision that had marked her sister's upbringing. Named for her aunt, the former Empress Fawzia of Iran, who had briefly married the Shah before divorcing and returning to Egypt, the second princess inherited both a distinguished name and a place in the complex web of Middle Eastern royal relationships. Her childhood was spent in the familiar rhythm of palace life, formal lessons with tutors, supervised play in palace gardens, and ceremonial appearances at religious and state occasions. From an early age, Princess Fawzia displayed a temperament notably different from her elder sister's serious demeanor. Palace staff remembered her as more spirited and curious, willing to explore forbidden corridors and ask questions that sometimes surprised her tutors. While Princess Ferial absorbed court protocol with solemn attention, Princess Fawzia seemed to regard ceremony as an interesting performance rather than a sacred duty. The differences between the sisters became more pronounced as they grew older. Princess Fawzia showed aptitude for physical activities, riding, swimming, and the athletic pursuits that Queen Farida encouraged as part of a modern royal education. She also displayed a gift for languages that surpassed even her sister's considerable abilities, mastering French and English, while showing enthusiasm for learning German and Italian. The political crisis that would ultimately destroy the monarchy unfolded during Princess Fawzia's formative years. Born into a world at war, she came of age as Egypt struggled with the aftermath of military defeat in Palestine and growing domestic unrest. Palace life continued, but the atmosphere grew increasingly tense as King Farouk's government faced mounting criticism from both Egyptian nationalists and British officials. Unlike Princess Ferial, who had experienced years of stable royal routine, Princess Fawzia's childhood was shaped by uncertainty and change. The divorce of her parents in 1948, when she was only 8, created additional emotional complexity. Queen Farida's struggle to maintain dignity while managing reduced circumstances taught her daughters lessons about resilience that would prove invaluable in the years ahead. When the Free Officers' Revolution erupted in July 1952, Princess Fawzia was 12 years old enough to understand that their world was ending, young enough to adapt to whatever might come next. The rapid succession of events that led to King Farouk's abdication and the family's exile provided her first real test of the flexibility and courage that would characterize her adult life. The transition to Swiss exile proved less traumatic for Princess Fawzia than for her elder sister. Where Princess Ferial mourned the loss of royal status and struggled with the adjustment to ordinary life, Princess Fawzia embraced the freedom that came with anonymity. Swiss schools offered opportunities for athletic competition, social interaction with peers, and academic challenges that had been impossible within the protective confines of palace education. At the Institut Le Rosé, Switzerland's most prestigious international school, Princess Fawzia excelled in languages, sports, and the social graces that came naturally to someone raised in royal circles. Her classmates included the children of European nobility, American business dynasties, and international diplomats, creating an environment where her background was interesting but not unique. She thrived in this cosmopolitan atmosphere, forming friendships that would last throughout her life. Princess Fawzia's linguistic talents flourished during these years. In addition to the Arabic, French, and English she had learned as a child, she became fluent in German, Italian, and eventually acquired working knowledge of Spanish and Portuguese. These abilities would later enable her to build a successful career as a professional interpreter and translator, but during her school years they simply reflected her natural curiosity about the world beyond Egypt's borders. The princess also discovered a passion for aviation that would remain with her throughout her life. During summer vacations, she took flying lessons at small airports around Switzerland and France, eventually earning her pilot's license and becoming qualified to operate both single-engine aircraft and gliders. This pursuit, still unusual for women in the 1950s and 1960s, reflected her independent spirit and willingness to challenge conventional expectations. Unlike her sisters, Princess Fawzia showed little interest in returning to Egypt or maintaining connections to the monarchy's former grandeur. She seemed to view the royal past as an interesting chapter in her personal history rather than a defining characteristic of her identity. This attitude would enable her to build an independent life with greater success than many royal exiles who remained psychologically bound to their lost status. By the time she completed her education in the mid-1960s, Princess Fawzia had transformed herself from Egyptian princess to European professional. The skills she had acquired, linguistic fluency, cultural adaptability, physical confidence, and social ease, provided the foundation for a career that would bring both personal satisfaction and financial independence. Unlike many former royals who struggled to find meaningful work in exile, Princess Fawzia built a distinguished career that utilized her exceptional talents while providing genuine service to the international community. Based in Geneva and later Lausanne, she established herself as one of Switzerland's most sought-after conference interpreters, specializing in diplomatic and business meetings that required expertise in both European and Middle Eastern languages. The work suited her temperament perfectly. Conference interpretation demanded quick thinking, cultural sensitivity, and the ability to remain calm under pressure, qualities Princess Fawzia had developed during her unconventional childhood and Swiss education. Her royal background, rather than being a hindrance, proved advantageous in dealing with high-level officials and business leaders who appreciated her discretion and natural dignity. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Princess Fawzia worked for international organizations, multinational corporations, and diplomatic missions throughout Europe. Her reputation for accuracy and professionalism led to regular assignments with the United Nations office in Geneva, various Middle Eastern embassies, and private companies negotiating deals across cultural and linguistic boundaries. Colleagues remember her as utterly reliable, diplomatically astute, and possessed of an almost photographic memory for technical terminology in multiple languages. Beyond her professional achievements, Princess Fawzia pursued an adventurous personal life that reflected her athletic interest and independent spirit. She earned sailing qualifications that allowed her to captain yachts on Lake Geneva and the Mediterranean, became a certified scuba diving instructor, and maintained her pilot's license throughout these decades. These pursuits connected her to an international community of sports enthusiasts who appreciated her skills without concern for her former royal status. The princess never married, a choice that reflected both her independent nature and perhaps the example of her parents' troubled relationship. Instead, she built a network of close friendships with colleagues, fellow athletes, and members of the international community in Geneva and Lausanne. Her apartment, elegantly furnished with pieces inherited from the royal household and art acquired during her travels, became a gathering place for dinner parties that mixed diplomats, business leaders, athletes, and intellectuals in conversations that ranged across multiple languages and cultural traditions. Princess Fawzia's financial success during these years enabled her to live comfortably while supporting various charitable causes, particularly organizations that provided educational opportunities for refugee children. Having experienced displacement herself, she understood the challenges faced by young people forced to adapt to new countries and cultures. Her contributions were made quietly, without publicity, reflecting the discretion that characterized all aspects of her life. By the 1990s, Princess Fawzia had achieved something remarkable for a member of Egypt's deposed royal family, a life of genuine independence and professional distinction that owed nothing to inherited privilege and everything to personal merit. She had proven that royal training, properly adapted, could provide excellent preparation for success in the modern world. The diagnosis came in 1995 when Princess Fawzia was 55 years old and at the height of her professional success. Multiple sclerosis, the neurological disease that would gradually rob her of the physical abilities she had always taken for granted, began with subtle symptoms that she initially attributed to stress and overwork. The progressive nature of the condition meant that her active lifestyle would become increasingly difficult to maintain. With characteristic determination, Princess Fawzia initially continued working and pursuing her athletic interests despite the advancing symptoms. She modified her apartment to accommodate mobility challenges and adapted her work schedule to account for periods of fatigue and reduced coordination. Friends and colleagues were struck by her refusal to complain or seek sympathy, maintaining the dignity and cheerful resilience that had always marked her character. As the disease progressed, Princess Fawzia was forced to retire from conference interpreting, the career that had provided both financial security and personal fulfillment for more than 2 decades. The loss was particularly painful for someone whose identity had been so closely connected to her professional competence and independence. Yet she faced this transition with the same grace she had shown in previous challenges, finding new ways to contribute to her community and maintain meaningful relationships. The final years of Princess Fawzia's life were marked by increasing dependence on her sisters, particularly Princess Ferial, who coordinated care and ensured that medical needs were met. The 3 sisters, scattered across Switzerland during their successful years, drew closer together as age and illness reminded them of their shared experiences and enduring bonds. Princess Fawzia's apartment became a gathering place where the sisters could speak Arabic, share memories of Egypt, and maintain the cultural connections that had shaped their early lives. Despite her physical limitations, Princess Fawzia remained intellectually engaged until near the end. She followed international news closely, maintained correspondence with friends from her working years, and took particular interest in Egypt's political and economic development. The country that had expelled her family had undergone dramatic changes since 1952, but she found satisfaction in its progress towards stability and modernization. Princess Fawzia died peacefully in Lausanne on January 2, 2005, at the age of 64. In accordance with family tradition and her own wishes, her body was transported to Egypt for burial in the royal cemetery at Al-Rifahi Mosque. The ceremony brought together surviving members of the Muhammad Ali dynasty and provided an occasion for reflection on the lives and contributions of King Farouk's children in their long exile. The funeral highlighted the remarkable transformation of Egypt's relationship with its royal past. The government that had expelled the royal family now provided official recognition for their return, acknowledging their place in Egyptian history while maintaining the republican principles established by the 1952 revolution. Princess Fawzia, the adventurous daughter who had built an independent life far from palace walls, was finally reunited with the soil of her birth. Princess Fadia entered the world on December 15, 1943, as the youngest of King Farouk's 3 daughters with Queen Farida. Her birth occurred during the darkest period of World War II, when German forces threatened Egypt's borders and Allied troops filled Cairo's streets. Yet within Abdeen Palace, the arrival of another princess was celebrated with the traditional ceremonies that marked royal births, even as the monarchy faced unprecedented challenges from war, economic pressure, and growing political opposition. As the youngest child, Princess Fadia enjoyed a somewhat different upbringing than her elder sisters. By the time of her birth, Queen Farida had gained confidence as a mother and had established clear principles for her daughter's education that combined royal protocol with practical preparation for an uncertain future. Palace life during Princess Fadia's early years was marked by wartime restrictions and growing political tension, but the royal household maintained its routines of lessons, ceremonies, and family gatherings. Princess Fadia showed artistic inclinations from an early age, displaying particular interest in painting and music that distinguished her from her more academically and athletically inclined sisters. Palace tutors noted her creative talents and encouraged artistic pursuits alongside the standard curriculum of languages, history, and religious instruction. She spent hours in the palace art studio working with watercolors and developing the skills that would remain important throughout her life. The political crisis that engulfed the monarchy during Princess Fadia's childhood created an atmosphere of uncertainty that affected all aspects of palace life. The divorce of her parents in 1948, when she was only 5 years old, was particularly traumatic for the youngest daughter, who had been especially close to both King Farouk and Queen Farida. The separation meant long periods when she saw little of her father, while her mother struggled to maintain stability for her 3 daughters. Unlike her sisters, who had experienced years of normal royal routine before the political troubles began, Princess Fadia's entire childhood was shaped by crisis and change. This early exposure to uncertainty may have contributed to her later reputation as the most emotionally sensitive of the 3 sisters, though it also developed in her a resilience that would prove valuable during the difficult years ahead. The events of July 1952 found Princess Fadia just 8 years old, young enough to be confused by the rapid changes, but old enough to sense the fear and sadness that surrounded the family's departure from Egypt, the yacht journey into exile, the hurried packing, and the tearful goodbyes to palace staff created lasting memories of loss and displacement that would influence her throughout her life. The transition to life in Switzerland proved challenging for Princess Fadia, the youngest and most sheltered of King Farouk's daughters. Where her sister Fawzia had embraced the freedom of exile and Ferial had adapted through disciplined adjustment, Princess Fadia struggled with homesickness and the loss of familiar surroundings. Swiss schools, with their emphasis on precision and conformity, initially seemed cold and unwelcoming to a child accustomed to the warmth and ceremony of palace life. Queen Farida, recognizing her youngest daughter's particular needs, arranged for Princess Fadia to attend schools in both Switzerland and Italy, hoping that exposure to different educational environments would help her find a comfortable place. The strategy proved successful, as Princess Fadia responded well to the more relaxed atmosphere of Italian institutions, while benefiting from the academic rigor of Swiss education. During these formative years, Princess Fadia's artistic talents flourished under the guidance of European teachers who recognized her natural gifts. She studied painting with instructors in Florence and Rome, developing techniques in both traditional and contemporary styles. Her work showed particular sensitivity to color and composition, reflecting perhaps the visual memories of Egypt's landscapes and the artistic treasures that had filled her childhood home. Music also became important to Princess Fadia during her school years. She learned to play piano and developed an appreciation for both classical European compositions and the traditional Arabic music that connected her to her homeland. These artistic pursuits provided emotional outlets during the difficult years of adjustment while developing skills that would bring lifelong satisfaction. Unlike her sisters, Princess Fadia showed continuing interest in Egypt and the Arabic culture that had shaped her early childhood. She maintained correspondence with former palace staff who had been allowed to leave Egypt and took Arabic language lessons to preserve her fluency. This connection to her origins would later influence her choice of career and her desire to maintain cultural bridges between Europe and the Middle East. As Princess Fadia completed her education in the early 1960s, she had developed into a young woman of artistic sensitivity and cultural awareness, less academically driven than Princess Ferial and less adventurous than Princess Fawzia, but possessed of emotional intelligence and creative talents that distinguished her within the family. The foundation had been laid for a life that would balance artistic expression with family devotion and cultural bridge building. In 1965, at the age of 22, Princess Fadia married Prince Pierre Orloff, a member of the Russian noble family that had adopted the Arabic name Said Orloff following their own exile after the Russian Revolution. The ceremony took place in London, reflecting the international character of royal exile families who had lost their kingdoms but maintained their connections across European borders. Pierre Orloff brought to the marriage a shared understanding of royal displacement and the challenges of building meaningful lives after the loss of inherited position. Like Princess Fadia, he had grown up in exile, educated in European schools while maintaining connection to a cultural heritage that could no longer be lived in its original setting. Their union represented not just personal compatibility, but a common experience of adaptation and survival in a world that had moved beyond traditional monarchy. The couple settled in Lausanne, where Princess Fadia found the combination of Swiss efficiency and international atmosphere conducive to both family life and her continuing artistic pursuits. Their home became a gathering place for other exile families and international residents who appreciated the princess's gracious hospitality and cultural sophistication. The domestic environment reflected her artistic training, furnished with carefully chosen pieces that combined European elegance with Middle Eastern influences. In the late 1960s and early 1970s, Princess Fadia gave birth to two sons, Michel Shamil and Alexander Ali. The names reflected the family's multicultural heritage, combining European, Russian, and Arabic elements in recognition of the complex identity that characterized their generation of royal exiles. Princess Fadia proved to be a devoted mother who was determined to provide her children with both stability and awareness of their distinguished ancestry. Motherhood did not prevent Princess Fadia from pursuing professional activities that utilized her linguistic skills and cultural knowledge. She found work as a translator for Swiss tourism organizations, helping to promote cultural exchange between Europe and the Middle East. The position suited her temperament and abilities while providing income that contributed to the family's financial security. Throughout the 1970s and early 1980s, Princess Fadia successfully balanced family responsibilities with her artistic interests and professional duties. She continued painting, exhibiting occasionally in local galleries, and maintaining the cultural salon that brought together friends from diverse backgrounds. Her life during this period represented a successful adaptation of royal training to middle-class European society, demonstrating that royal education could provide excellent preparation for productive citizenship. As her children reached adulthood and established independent lives, Princess Fadia entered a period of increased focus on artistic pursuits and community involvement. The 1990s found her more active in local cultural organizations, serving on committees that promoted international understanding and supported refugee assistance programs. Her royal background and linguistic abilities made her particularly effective in bridging cultural differences and facilitating communication between diverse groups. Princess Fadia's artistic work during these years showed increasing sophistication and personal expression. Her paintings, while still influenced by the traditional techniques she had learned as a student, began to incorporate themes that reflected her unique experience as a royal exile. Desert landscapes, palace architecture, and portraits of family members became recurring subjects, creating a visual memoir of loss, adaptation, and survival. The princess also became more involved in preserving family history and maintaining connections among the scattered members of Egypt's former royal family. She corresponded regularly with cousins and distant relatives throughout Europe and the Middle East, sharing information about marriages, births, and deaths that kept alive the human network that had once centered on the palaces of Cairo and Alexandria. Despite her apparent contentment with family and artistic pursuits, Princess Fadia's health had begun to decline during the late 1990s. Unlike her sister Fawzia's dramatic diagnosis of multiple sclerosis, the princess's problems were more subtle: fatigue, occasional chest pain, and other symptoms that seemed attributable to the normal aging process. She continued her activities while perhaps reducing their intensity, unwilling to burden family members with health concerns that seemed manageable. The end came suddenly and without warning. On December 9, 2002, Princess Fadia collapsed at her home in Lausanne and died before medical help could arrive. The cause was determined to be a massive heart attack, striking without the prolonged illness that had characterized other family deaths. She was 59 years old, the youngest of King Farouk's children to die, and the first to succumb to sudden rather than lingering illness. In accordance with family tradition, Princess Fadia's body was transported to Egypt for burial in the royal cemetery at Al-Rifai Mosque. The funeral brought together her sons, her surviving sisters, and members of the extended royal family for a ceremony that honored both her individual contributions and her place in the dynasty's history. Princess Fadia, remembered as the most artistic and emotionally generous of King Farouk's daughters, was laid to rest in the country that had shaped her childhood and claimed her loyalty despite decades of exile. Her death marked the end of a life that had successfully combined royal heritage with middle-class values, artistic expression with family, devotion, and cultural preservation with practical adaptation. Like her sisters, she had proven that royal training could provide excellent preparation for citizenship in the modern world while maintaining the dignity and grace that honored her ancestors and inspired her descendants. On January 16, 1952, just 6 months before the Free Officers' Revolution would destroy the monarchy, Queen Nariman gave birth to King Farouk's only son at Abdeen Palace. The arrival of a male heir was celebrated throughout Egypt with unprecedented enthusiasm, as the kingdom finally had a direct successor to continue the dynasty established by Muhammad Ali Pasha in 1805. The infant prince was named Fuad after his grandfather King Fuad I, and his birth seemed to promise decades of continued royal rule. The baby prince's early months unfolded within the magnificent surroundings of Abdeen Palace, where he was attended by English nannies and surrounded by the elaborate protocol reserved for a future king. Photographs from this period show a healthy infant in elaborate christening gowns, held by proud parents who could hardly have imagined that their son's reign would be measured in months rather than years. The political crisis that erupted in July 1952 transformed the 6-month-old prince from heir apparent to reigning monarch in a matter of hours. When King Farouk abdicated on July 26, 1952, rather than face deposition by the revolutionary government, baby Fuad automatically became King Fuad II of Egypt and Sudan. The infant monarch was too young to understand the ceremonies that proclaimed his accession, or the political forces that would soon eliminate his throne entirely. A regency council was established to govern in the child king's name, but this arrangement satisfied neither the revolutionary officers who sought to eliminate monarchy entirely, nor the Egyptian people who had lost faith in royal institutions. Queen Nariman, faced with the responsibility of protecting her infant son in an increasingly hostile political environment, made the painful decision to take him into exile before worse consequences could befall the royal family. The brief reign of King Fuad II officially ended on June 18, 1953, when the Egyptian Republic was proclaimed and the monarchy was formally abolished. At 18 months of age, the deposed king became the shortest reigning monarch in Egyptian history and one of the youngest sovereigns ever to lose a throne. The crown that had been placed on his infant head was relegated to the museums, while the boy who had worn it faced a lifetime of exile in Europe. The transformation from reigning king to stateless exile represented perhaps the most dramatic change of circumstances experienced by any member of Egypt's royal family. Unlike his half-sisters, who had at least experienced several years of normal childhood before losing their royal status, Fuad II would grow up with no personal memory of the palace life that had shaped his family for generations. The early years of the former king's exile were marked by family instability that compounded the challenges of displacement and lost status. Queen Nariman's marriage to King Farouk had been troubled even before the revolution, and the stresses of exile proved impossible to overcome. The royal couple divorced in 1954 when their son was barely 2 years old, creating additional uncertainty about the boy's upbringing and future. Custody arrangements placed young Fuad primarily with his mother, who settled in Switzerland and focused on providing her son with the stability and education that would enable him to build an independent life. The decision to raise him as a Swiss citizen rather than maintaining the fiction of royal exile reflected Queen Nariman's practical approach to their changed circumstances and her determination to prepare her son for success in the modern world. The Institut Le Rosey, Switzerland's most prestigious international school, provided the former king with an education that combined academic excellence with the social graces expected of European elite. His classmates included the children of business leaders, diplomats, and surviving members of European royal families, creating an environment where his background was understood without being defining. Teachers remember him as a serious, well-mannered student who showed particular aptitude for languages and political science. Unlike his half-sisters, who maintained some connection to Arabic language and Middle Eastern culture through their mother Queen Farida, Fuad II grew up almost entirely within European cultural context. His fluency in French, German, English, and Italian reflected the international character of his education, while his Arabic remained limited to ceremonial phrases learned for formal occasions. This linguistic pattern would later symbolize the extent of his separation from the Egypt that had briefly acknowledged him as king. Throughout his school years, the former king demonstrated the diplomatic skills that would characterize his adult life. He learned to navigate conversations about his unique background without either embarrassment or arrogance, developing a manner that acknowledged his royal heritage while emphasizing his commitment to building a meaningful life through personal achievement. This balance would prove essential as he entered university and began preparing for a professional career. The University of Geneva provided Fuad II with training in political science and economics that reflected both his intellectual interests and practical awareness of the skills needed for business success. His thesis work focused on economic development in post-colonial societies, a topic that allowed him to examine Egypt's evolution after 1952 without dwelling on personal losses or dynastic grievances. The academic exercise helped him develop a mature perspective on the historical forces that had shaped his unusual life. Upon completing his university education, the former King Fuad II faced the challenge that confronted all royal exiles, building a career that provided both financial security and personal fulfillment while managing the complications that arose from his distinctive background. Unlike his half-sisters, who could rely on professional skills and blend into middle-class European society, he carried a title that remained internationally recognized even if politically meaningless. The solution he developed reflected both pragmatism and dignity. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, he built a successful business career that focused on international trade and consulting, utilizing his linguistic abilities and cultural knowledge to facilitate transactions between European and Middle Eastern partners. His royal background, rather than being a hindrance, proved advantageous in dealing with traditional societies where hereditary status still commanded respect. The former king's business activities took him throughout Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East, providing opportunities to observe firsthand the economic and social changes that had transformed the region since his childhood. These experiences deepened his understanding of the historical forces that had eliminated traditional monarchy while creating new opportunities for international cooperation and development. In 1977, Fuad II married Dominique France Loeb Picard, who took the name Fadila upon their marriage. The wedding, held in Paris, brought together surviving members of various royal families and representatives of the international business community that had become the former king's professional environment. The ceremony symbolized his successful integration into European society while maintaining appropriate recognition of his distinctive heritage. During the 1980s and early 1990s, Fuad II occasionally accepted public roles that utilized his position as head of the Muhammad Ali dynasty without involving political implications. He served on cultural committees, participated in charitable organizations supporting Middle Eastern refugees, and represented his family at ceremonial occasions that honored Egypt's historical heritage. These activities provided constructive outlets for his royal identity while avoiding any suggestion of political ambition. The former king's approach to his unique situation earned respect from both Republican Egyptian officials and surviving monarchist sympathizers. He consistently avoided political controversy while maintaining dignity and cultural awareness that honored his ancestors without threatening contemporary stability. This balanced approach would prove essential as Egypt gradually reopened doors to royal family members in subsequent decades. The 1980s and 1990s brought Fuad II the personal fulfillment of fatherhood and the satisfaction of seeing the Muhammad Ali dynasty continue through a new generation raised in freedom, if not in power. His three children, Prince Muhammad Ali, born in 1979, Princess Fawzia Latifa, born in 1982, and Prince Fakhruddin, born in 1987, represented the successful adaptation of royal heritage to contemporary European society. Prince Muhammad Ali, the heir to his father's theoretical claim to the Egyptian throne, grew up speaking French as his first language while learning Arabic and developing appreciation for his Middle Eastern heritage. His education followed the same international pattern that had shaped his father's development, combining Swiss academic rigor with exposure to diverse cultural traditions. Unlike his grandfather King Farouk, who had been raised specifically for royal duties, Prince Muhammad Ali was prepared for whatever opportunities the modern world might offer. Princess Fawzia Latifa, named for her aunt Princess Fawzia, showed particular interest in the artistic traditions that had been important to the royal family throughout their exile years. Her talents in painting and music continued the cultural interests that had provided emotional sustenance for previous generations while adapting them to contemporary educational and professional opportunities. Prince Fakhruddin, the youngest of Fuad II's children, displayed the linguistic abilities that had characterized multiple generations of the family. His fluency in Arabic, French, German, and English positioned him to serve as a cultural bridge between European and Middle Eastern societies, continuing the international role that had defined his family's exile experience. The marriage of Fuad II and Fadila ended in divorce in 1996. Reflecting perhaps the difficulties that even the most successful royal marriages faced in adapting to modern expectations and pressures. The former king retained close relationships with his children while accepting the personal losses that accompanied the dissolution of his family unit. As Egypt continued its political and economic development through the 1990s and into the 21st century, opportunities gradually emerged for members of the former royal family to visit their homeland without political complications. Fuad II made several trips to Egypt during this period, meeting with government officials, visiting historical sites, and renewing connections with the country that had briefly acknowledged him as king. These visits revealed a nation transformed beyond recognition from the Egypt of his infancy. The population had tripled, Cairo had become a modern metropolis, and economic development had created opportunities and challenges that his great-great-grandfather Muhammad Ali Pasha could never have imagined. Yet essential cultural patterns persisted, and the former king found himself welcomed as a representative of historical continuity rather than a threat to contemporary stability. In recent interviews, Fuad II has reflected thoughtfully on his unusual life and the historical forces that shaped his family's experience. He expresses neither bitterness about lost opportunities nor unrealistic expectations about restoration, instead emphasizing the valuable lessons that exile provided about adaptability, cultural awareness, and the importance of building meaningful lives through personal achievement rather than inherited privilege. Today, the former king, Fuad II, continues to live quietly in Switzerland and France, maintaining business interests while serving as the unofficial head of the Muhammad Ali family. His role has evolved into that of cultural custodian and historical representative, preserving family traditions and dynastic memory while supporting his children's integration into contemporary European society. The transformation from infant king to elderly European businessman represents perhaps the most complete adaptation to modernity achieved by any member of Egypt's former royal family. Fuad II has successfully navigated the challenges of lost status, cultural displacement, and personal reinvention, while maintaining the dignity and international perspective that honor his distinguished ancestry. From the marble halls of Abdeen Palace to the quiet streets of Swiss cities, the four children of King Farouk traversed a century of revolutionary change that transformed not only Egypt but the entire concept of monarchy in the modern world. Princess Ferial, Princess Fawzia, Princess Fadia, and King Fuad II began their lives surrounded by ceremony and privilege, heir to a dynasty that had ruled Egypt for nearly a century and a half. They ended as European citizens whose accomplishments owed nothing to inherited position and everything to personal character and determination. Their collective story mirrors the broader transformation of the 20th century, when traditional authority gave way to democratic institutions and hereditary privilege yielded to individual merit. Each of King Farouk's children found different ways to adapt royal training to republican realities: Ferial through marriage and family devotion, Fawzia through professional achievement and athletic excellence, Fadia through artistic expression and cultural bridge building, Fuad through business success and diplomatic discretion. 3 of the 4 now lie buried in Cairo's Al-Rifai Mosque, their bodies returned to the Egyptian soil that had nurtured their ancestors for generations. Their funerals were attended by officials of the Republic that had expelled their family, a gesture of historical reconciliation that honored their place in Egypt's story while affirming the permanence of political change. The 4th, former King Fuad II, continues to carry the dynastic title in Swiss exile, serving as custodian of family memory and representative of historical continuity without political power. His children and grandchildren represent the final evolution of the Muhammad Ali dynasty, fully European in culture and citizenship, yet aware of their distinguished Middle Eastern heritage and the remarkable journey that brought their family from palace to permanent exile. The legacy of Farouk's children lies not in crowns or kingdoms, but in their demonstration that royal education, properly adapted, could provide excellent preparation for citizenship in the modern world. They proved that dignity and grace were not dependent on political power, that cultural heritage could be preserved without political restoration, and that successful lives could be built through personal achievement rather than inherited privilege. Their story closes a chapter that began when Muhammad Ali Pasha seized control of Egypt in 1805 and established the dynasty that would rule for nearly a century and a half. The line continues quietly in European exile, no longer royal in anything but name, but carrying forward the memory of a vanished world and the proof that honor and achievement transcend the rise and fall of kingdoms.